in many times throughout the journey, I always ask myself, am I still the right guy to run the company?
Welcome to part 2 of Invested with Yonatan Adiri, the former CEO of Healthy.io and its founder. Today we're going to talk about Yonatan's decision to step down from Healthy.io. We think it's a super interesting and meaningful episode, a must-listen for any entrepreneur and investor. So join me as I talk again to Yonatan Adiri.
So let me summarize this for a second, which is you went through 4 extinction events. You're serving 1 million patients that you're preventing from ever having to get to dialysis. You saw AI coming before just about anybody else did and built it into the phone and into the cloud. There's Persuasion OS, which is AI-driven, and now generative AI-driven, or persuasiveness for healthcare. Color AI, which is, AI for analyzing all this machine vision, these incredible samples of dipsticks and urine sticks that you've done. And this company was born out of your mother's injury in China, and you're a decade in, and so you just stepped down as a CEO?
Yeah.
Why?
So I think maybe 2 fundamental points about sort of the journey. First and foremost, as I've shared, sort of openly, for me, public service was always, and specifically in Israel, right? For me, for my wife, for my community, was always priority number 1. I think that, in many times throughout the journey, I also kind of have my own, I would say, motivation from that perspective. I always ask myself, as companies, and our company kind of morphed, right? And you've seen companies outlast a decade and becoming, kind of generational capacity companies. They morph because reality changes and you got to morph. So in every morphing, at least 4, right? I asked myself a question, am I still the right guy to run the company, right? When we survived the first extinction, am I the right guy? And I think where Healthy.io is right now, the vision is very clear. The technology engines are very, very clear. The management team is phenomenal, globally and in Israel. Our ultimate test right now is how do we extend sales in the US over the next 24 months? Can we unlock some of those big contracts that we've won? Can we unlock collaborating with the government, the NCQA and others, and push through 1 million to 10 million patients, right? When we do that, healthcare is it's forever changed because of Healthy. Digital healthcare is forever changed because of Healthy. But I think the space of what can be done at home depends on how well we do our next 9 million tests. Now, when I ask myself, am I the right person at this point in time to drive 9 million patients in the US, which is the target market ultimately? You want to IPO, you want to raise more capital and build that 2030 platform. Somewhere in 23, my answer was, I'm not sure. For the first time in over a decade of a company, but almost 12 years of journey for me. And I think we can kind of share with the audience, we've had conversations about that. And you've given me a lot of food for thought into how to run through that process myself and get to the conclusion, get to the answer. So that was the process that kicked off. I also had a severe injury that roughly about a year ago, that also kind of got me to think in a more profound way about that, right? Like, there's a saying by the Jewish sages, I don't know how to translate it into English that well.
You do the Hebrew, I'll do the English. Good.
Lo alecha amlacha ligmor, ve'encha ben chorin libatel mimena.
You're not required to finish all the work, but at the same time, you don't have the privilege or the ability to walk away from it.
Exactly. So that kind of was very strong with me. So when I decided to transition somewhere in, call it July, and we were looking for the right person to take the CEO role, it was clear that the goal, look, I'm not the best sales guy in the world. This is about sales. This is about scale. And it needs to be, in my view, at the next morphing of the company, an American CEO. Now, that doesn't mean that the work is done. It doesn't mean that that it's not incumbent on me to be there to see it through. And therefore, I took the role of president. I'm doing the work on public affairs. But there's also a question of another quote from our sages which is, Al tomar lichshe paneh shaneh, shema lo tipaneh. Like,
Right.
if you want to,
Don't say that when I free my time up, I will study.
Yeah.
Because you may not free any time up.
Exactly. So the idea of going back to public service and going back to serving community at large here in Israel, there's always going to be a good quote unquote excuse out of the healthy journey to kind of say, oh, I'll do it next year when we IPO. I'll do it next year when we cross the 5 million people. I'll do it next year. It's a never ending thing. And for me, that calling is very profound.
But what made you figure out that you're not, like, founders kind of morph also. So what made you figure out that you're not the right guy suddenly when it comes to like this big commercialization push in the U.S.? What was kind of the moment or the trigger?
Yeah, I think you really have to be very honest with yourself, right?
Most people aren't there. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Something must have caused you. It must be a something.
Look, again, honestly, for me, we didn't manage to crack it for a certain period of time, tried different approaches, and really, honestly, for me, at some point, you gotta look at the empirical data and say, this is a task for someone who's done this 4 or 5 times. And in many ways, by the way, the task we have in front of us over the next 24 months is a task that has been done before, in a way, right? Like, it has a method and there's ways to go from 1 million to 10 million. Whereas the tasks we've had before, there was no textbook. There was no epistemology. There wasn't, you do this to create the medical selfie. Medical selfie 101, right? Sales of 1 million to 10 million, post-FDA, there are sort of textbooks for that. And I genuinely believed at that point, so come July, August, that for me to morph into that would be just not a good use of shareholder value, not driving shareholder value within the right time, in the right velocity. And so that was, the driver for my decision in a way.
So you met like a lot of candidates, a bunch of candidates for the CEO job along the way. Yeah. And you said to them, hey, I'm going to step down.
Yeah.
Number one, did they actually believe you?
No.
Most of them didn't believe you.
Yeah.
And because they thought you'd get in the way, you wouldn't give up the job.
Yeah.
And how did you persuade them that you were serious, that you're actually going to do this?
I sent them to you. No, but honestly, I think that, conversation one, a lot of people didn't believe. But when you the 4 or 5 finalists that went through a few hours of a journey with me in terms of how decisions are made, and then met Oz, who's our COO and CFO, and met Ron, who's in many ways my co-founder that came in like 1 year later, and the credit for the execution on the Color AI and the persuasion is all his in that sense, right? And they saw people who really kind of gave them the sense that I'm very credible, and when I say something, that's what I do, and they've been through quite a long period of time with me. And that's something we're very proud of, by the way, as a company. We are a core team of about 60 people that have been doing this for almost 9 years together. Yeah. Nobody left.
The loyalty is incredible.
Yeah, and so when some of those candidates expanded, spoke to Naomi, spoke to Oz, spoke to Ron, they're like, oh, he means it, right? He's a serious guy. And also the type of management strategy we built was always 90-10, right? I had a philosophy of always managing the vacuum, right? So in the beginning, I did everything. I dipped sticks, I went to the lab, whatever. Certain point.
I remember, by the way, you showing me very proudly this little bizarro robot.
Yeah,
in that
in
office on Rothschild Boulevard was like a box.
Yeah.
It looked like it was out of I don't know, like a.
Jokes aside,
with like a million light bulbs in it that were going off in different things.
We called it the automator. And jokes aside, like how do you generate? Like again, let's geek for a sec on the tech, right? This is very advanced optics. You need to recreate color from a sensor that you don't own in a lighting condition that you have no idea. Right, because every person, literally 1 million tests, 1 million lighting, 1 million spectrums, right?
Yeah, let's just say the lighting in the bathroom stall in the public park is not the same as the lighting in the bathroom stall in my house or anywhere else.
And, where people test, it's the privacy of their own home. Some folks have a blue wall, some folks have a yellow wall. It affects that's why it's very hard to compete with us. So we had to generate enough data to even start developing the algorithms. And we were like, what are we going to do? We're going to just go and take pictures in certain places. So the automator was born and actually carried out its role. long story short, I did marketing in the early days. I did a lot of things in the early days. But as those fields got kind of, I would say, there was less haze and more clarity, we brought in the best people to do that, and I moved on, right? Come 2019, right? We had the best product person in the world doing this. We had the best CFO in the world doing this. We had the best marketing person in the world. So I was kind of, I don't know if you remember, I used to tell, little did I know that I ended up in a way predicting something. I used to tell the board, if I, get injured in a car accident, the company would not feel that for 6 months out. That's how I want to design my management, right? I need to be busy with things 6 months onwards. Company needs to run impeccably. And it has the best management team to run impeccably for 6 months out at any given moment.
But I know,
right?
But like I sat there when you handed the reins over to Geoff Martin, and we'll come to Geoff in a second.
Yeah.
And the question I asked myself, but I reserved it for right now, is like, how did you really feel? Like, this was your 5th child.
Yeah. No, but listen, I think we are at a point right now in the world where we are witnessing what happens when folks at the top hold on to the reins for too long, across the globe, across industries. I think it's ultimately a healthy thing to do. I'm a very emotional person when it comes to my family, my kids, Israel, and values. But when it comes to the entrepreneurial track, I'm very kind of purpose-driven and very honest and very diligent in the sense, Billie Jean King has this beautiful quote that says, pressure is privilege, right? I always knew that on the journey. And, we've been through some hard times with the FDA delays and stuff like that. For me, that pressure was always a privilege because I knew we're building a company to serve people. I came to the company from public service where I saw really, kind of world-changing hard stuff. The sausage factory that is global statescraft, it kind of gives you perspective. So for me, yes, in many ways, it is a baby. But for instance, I never spoke of Healthy.io as a family. Never. And I also told that to our team and this is a place where we sign a contract every day of trust that you want to come here and you want to be part of what we're trying to do in the world. And when you'll decide to leave, it's totally fine. And when we'll decide to part ways with you because of merit, because of change of direction, whatever, we both know that there's a bigger goal here and we're trying to get there to serve people, to get to 1 million patients, 10 million, whatnot. And so I'm not going to give you some fake language on family and then I don't fire my kids, right? So from that perspective, pressure is privilege. The company is a company. It has a purpose. It has shareholders. And for over a decade, I felt genuinely that I'm the right person to drive that value. And so in many ways, when I handed the keys over to Geoff, I just knew it's the right thing to do.
When I started my career, it was very common that you brought in the professional CEO to replace the founder. And then there became this thing about founder-friendly.
Yeah.
Where everyone wanted to be the most founder-friendly. And there's some truth to it. Michael Dell created an incredible company and Bill Gates created an incredible company. They forgot about the vast majority of companies that were actually created by the CEOs that were brought in. But, this mythical kind of founder thing. And you kind of speak about this now almost transactionally. And, it's not my baby. It's not my company.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not doesn't fit the narrative or the zeitgeist around this mythical founder figure.
I think, but everything is a system. Everything things come together, right? If it's all about you, you're a mythical founder and you built the company that way, then it's not resilient enough, right? If it's about you, you don't go through 4 extinction events and have your management team intact and tackle it and get to 1 million patients. You just don't. It doesn't happen.
Well,
right?
Maybe if you're a great leader, you can, right?
So I think greatness in that space, right? So I'll give you an example. When Facebook IPO'd, and the whole notion of eternal founder control in the public market was legitimized, I looked at it and said, that's wrong. He can be an amazing leader, and obviously
build an incredible
company. But from my perspective, I wouldn't even want to have that. If I can't convince my board, again, it's a private company, not as a public company, of a certain idea, and I bring it to a vote, and it's voted against, and I don't have a super voting share, I should think through why that happened, right? Right? If qualified, smart people on my board I don't know, 8 out of 10 think completely different than what I think.
Maybe we're not so smart though. We don't see the same things. Like I couldn't have invented Healthy IO.
So I gotta be able to convince you. Again, I'm not a public. This is not open to the Carl Icahns of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a genuine in the private market. Still, should be a genuine kind of shareholder kind of driving together. So for me, I never wanted this to be about me. Right? That's not something I ever had in mind.
Is that unique to your personality, or would you give the same advice to every other founder?
I think, look, one of the things I learned from running clinical trials time and time again is that, like, for some things, N equals 1. I think it's like the mental strength you need to go through a journey of a decade in building a company makes it so, renders this decision to be very personal. Some folks, and there's no right and wrong, right? Some folks need that. And by the way, some folks also get energized by that. That's them being at the top in a pyramid structure energizes them. Kudos, great. Like if that's what gives you, for me, that's not what gave me the force to withstand the crazy upheavals of FDA grade digital health on a pioneering track.
But do you worry the company will lose some energy because you're gone?
I don't think so. I think the company needs different types of energies right now, right? So yes, it would lose some energies that I brought forward, but the kind of energies it needs right now, Geoff delivers way better than I could ever.
So tell us why, Geoff.
So as you said, I met many candidates, and I think one of the most critical pieces, and the finalists were all great salespeople, well established, right? You kind of get to the last part where the finalists are kind of very close to each other from that perspective. There's one thing that Geoff kindled in me and listened carefully in those conversations and gave me that trust. And by the way, it's now been a couple of months, and I have to say he's doing like 10x than I thought, like from that perspective specifically. He gave me this feeling that from a cultural perspective, right, he's going to be an amazing fit.
So you hired for culture, not capability?
So I'm saying I hired for capability until we got to 4 finalists.
Right.
And all things being equal on capability, right, one of the 4 was kind of Geoff was towering over the rest in the sense that, I'll say it kind of in a way that, it's a cross-cultural, honestly, like Israel, US, he was the most Israeli in terms of his ability to communicate to me grit, forward-looking, I'm going to get this done, and if it doesn't work this way, I'll do it that way, and if it doesn't work this way, I'll do it that way. And for me, that is a critical piece. I'm just non-romantic.
And he turned up here for the handoff in the middle of the war.
I agree, exactly. Exactly. So for me, like, I'm very, I don't have any romanticism about entrepreneurship. It's hard. And especially when you're pushing against a medical convention with a regulator on top, it is very hard. And you meet people along the way that are not open-minded, that have been hit by Theranos. They have legitimate rights, right?
Would you tell people not to do a healthcare company if they came to you for advice?
I think it's a broad, now where we're headed. It's a broad gamut of healthcare companies. So for instance, bioinformatics, definitely.
Definitely yes.
Definitely yes. Yeah. I think it's a field that's sort of starting to behave more like software. It's very hard to differentiate. You got to have you got to have a molecule quality to your AI, right? And by the way, there hasn't still been a big success in that space. I think now the CRISPR companies are coming and it's going to be different. But bioinformatics, for sure, go for it. But I think, yes, you got to go for it. Just know that it's going to be a journey that involves so many different stakeholders that you're going to have to convince. And many times they have conflicting, And
can we actually get like the innovation we need given the regulatory structure we have now? No, we can't.
No. Look, we're pasturing in many fields of the world. We're pasturing sick and hungry holy cows. You know what I mean? Like in regulation, everybody knows it's like there's so many holy cows. Don't do this, don't do that. Da, 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 da. We all know the system doesn't work, but we're still pasturing them, right? And I was hoping
we're putting them out to pasture slow.
Yeah, but listen, there needs to be a slaughterhouse, not a pasture for that kind of stuff. We need to reinvent these things. And I was hoping, and just to give you a sense, COVID was a great example of slaughtering those holy cows. Like to allow for mRNA in billions of people with I don't know, 5,000-6,000 people clinical trial is unheard. Like that was not anywhere near the dogma that the FDA would consider come, circa early 2020. And still a year later it happened, right? Look, it's been, what is it now, 3 billion injections? 4 billion. Mortality rate hasn't changed. We're not seeing any, imagine how many people are dying right now because of those holy cows that are sick and we're not willing to touch them and say, okay, in the era of CRISPR, we don't need that, right?
I think back to the beginning of the conversation, we said about Shimon Peres. I feel like Shimon Peres, if he was chairman of the FDA today, would have not missed the opportunity to make a foundational change in how we speed up innovation.
I agree, but I have also a lot of respect to them in terms of they're liable and they're accountable. I think it's the structure around them that also, again, going back to Shimon Peres 85, there's one way of saying we need FDA reform. That's glib. That's not the story.
Yeah.
Because if you hold the FDA accountable, right, and you're telling them reform, it's very hard for them because they're the ones on the hook, right? But if you're telling them, I'm going to change the entire incentive structure, me as a country, the CFR, the Federal Code of Regulation around healthcare, I'm going to go to Congress, I'm going to change that so you're not on the hook kind of solely, and you're going to build, a different kind of multi-stakeholder process around that, which, by the way, is starting to happen.
Slowly.
Then you're going to get the FDA being willing to have more appetite. But it's unfair to say, I'm going to reform. That's sort of my kind of thinking right now. We're trying to reform stuff, but we're expecting foundational changes. That doesn't come from reform, right? It comes from a foundational change. You can't keep the FDA with all the liability and then ask them to be radically different in terms of how they review drugs. So, you've been with me since the early days of this journey through a lot of crises, a lot of good parts also, and have mentored me and have been a person that I kind of looked up to in many tough decisions. When I stepped down, you asked me about how I felt about it. How did that feel to you? You've seen companies transition. You've seen kind of that growth episode.
So, the first thing, one of the ways I try to measure myself is if I have had a good experience with somebody, and they're not all good experiences along the way, do we stay friends afterwards? Mm-hmm. And so more important than anything is, I think, you'll tell me later, that we've developed a friendship and a professional relationship that goes beyond the company. I hope to keep working together for many years. Number two, as I said before, I don't think stepping down is a bad thing. In fact, I think we've gotten too, quote unquote, founder friendly, that you follow the founder blindly till the end of time. And I think finding a way for founders to be self-reflective, like you've been, and to make the right decision for the shareholders in the company is really important. This is not kumbaya. The rules of capitalism say that the company belongs to the shareholders.
100%.
And the founder and the CEO serves at the discretion of the board of directors. Now, you made it easy for us. We didn't fire you or need to fire you. You decided to initiate the process, in consultation with us and the rest of the board. And I think that's admirable. But I think you deliver an important lesson, which is if a founder feels like there should be somebody else telling the job and doing the job, and someone else could do a better job, there's not only nothing wrong with saying, let me go get someone else. There's greatness in that moment of self-recognition and doing it. And it's often better for the financial well-being of the founder too, of somebody else to take this forward. So how did I feel? I was challenged, because it's always challenging. Change is challenging. And you've worked alongside somebody who you have built trust with over that time. I hope we built trust. So it's challenging. And at the same time, I think it's inspirational. And candidly, I'll show you, I think it was the right thing for the company and for you personally. So I'm glad we're here. Yonatan, for the peanut gallery over here, that's standing in the background that the viewers can't see, they'd like you to offer me criticism on my role as a board member and an investor. So
look, I think what probably is different at Healthy than other portfolio companies, I'm venturing, I don't know if it's true. When you made the decision and the partnership made the decision to invest in an FDA grade seeking company, I think you knew you're going on a journey in which in some areas you won't be able to go to the founder and say, I've seen this before. This is what we should do. So, would I have wanted to have somebody on the board that had more conviction and had, built companies and sold them or IPO'd them in the healthcare space? But for me, the fact
that... So you've correctly pointed out that I knew absolutely nothing about this business when I invested into it or the regulatory journey.
And you can argue both ways about that. And for me, the knowledge that I can come to, and you'd be unencumbered, right? Because you haven't been there before, but your pattern recognition of seeing similar situations that kind of ring a bell. And, go back to what I told you about my parents. This was very much like how I was brought up, right? I'll think about it with you. I'll highlight but it's your, that's how I would think about it, but I totally respect any decision here, so long as it's kind of well thought out and presented and we bring it to the board. That process we went through, I think, hundreds of times through that process. When I would come and you'd say, well, I haven't seen this before. You had that humility to say, I haven't seen, but you gave me ways to think about it. And then you said, you know what, and go think about it. And if it's a well thought out answer, then let's move on. Were there some mistakes I've made that, you could have probably prevented? And I probably eventually you kind of say, I'm going to let him make that mistake.
But I probably couldn't have prevented
right?
it anyway.
No, but in a guarded way, right? Created a space where I can make certain types of mistakes that would teach us and get us to become better management, like around D2C back in the days and UTI and so on. I grew a lot through that. And, it's a disadvantage to invest in a company that goes to the FDA when you haven't had that experience before. But it's also a great advantage because the curiosity and the kind of pattern recognition capacity gets you there. That's an honest, to the peanut gallery.
Yeah, I kind of thank you for telling our LPs that they have a partner that they've invested in that invests in things he has no idea about. I appreciate that. Thank you. So as we come to the end here, I want to ask a couple of questions. I heard you give a talk in Basel, Switzerland.
Yeah.
I think it was entitled Continuous Disruption, the era of continuous disruption. Yeah. Can you summarize for us in a minute or two what that is?
In essence, when I came back from NASA, one of the things I realized is this exponential growth of tech with a declining price, like a deflationary tech, is not going anywhere. This is the new norm. And when we were looking for what that does and what asymmetries it creates, we realized it's a non-stop thing. I came to the president. He was a naming guy. He needed a name for it. So I showed him, it's like, I buy it. How do we call it? And I had to go all the way down to Trotsky. He's the one who called it the permanent revolution, the era of permanent revolution. Peres, by the way, called it an era of permanent genesis, which is better, right? But this is what we're seeing in Gaza. This is what we're seeing in Russia. This is what we're seeing with Iran. It's never been easier to leverage technology to create a radical change in the world, for better and worse. So that's how I think about where we are right now. We are in a very dangerous point in history. If we have the moral authority and if we have the morals right, we're going to get CRISPR, get rid of cancer. We're going to have bioinformatics introduce new drugs, radical life extension. We're seeing that with GLP now with Novo Nordisk. Or we can end up, going back to the Middle Ages, the type of violence, dirty bombs. It's almost a Promethean period. And what do we do with that? That's where the era of permanent revolution takes us.
And so when you think about this era of permanent revolution, and you've done a decade now in entrepreneurship, before that in public service, what does the next decade for Yonatan Adiri look like?
Government for an era of permanent revolution, right? I think civilians, specifically in democracies, are underserved by those. It's the same pasture of holy cows that are sick, right? And nobody's willing to touch them the way the late 70s saw a radical change in how government delivers on its promise. That's where we're headed, and that's where I'm going to dedicate my time, over the next few decades.
Is that in politics? Is that in the bureaucracy? Is that in...
I think, these are the first few weeks that I'm kind of opening my head to that, but I think first and foremost, understanding the kind of establishing the slaughterhouse for for those holy cows is critical. Understanding
you get a public, there's going to be a lot of dead cows. We should just be aware
exactly.
of that. Yeah.
No, I think, and you've written about this extensively, right? You can't expect to get change that is radical without radical action, and radical action has a price. When 15,000 people from the public service of Israel lost their job in 1985, that was radical. That was painful, right? You can't get there without that. And we need the kind of leadership that would be able to tell that to the public in all truth and all honesty. Now, when it comes to Israel, I'm super bullish and super optimistic. We are a $550 billion economy, right? In less than 35 years. We were at 410% inflation. Now we are at 65% debt to GDP ratio. We have
one of the best in the West.
We have $150 billion of net cash reserves, right? One of the best tech scenes in the world, capital around, some of the best academia, kind of, in also the most important fields in quantum computing and so on and so forth. So there has never been a point in Jewish history, I think in the last 2,500 years, where a Jewish leader would stand and have all this at his disposal or her disposal to kind of pave the way for a century of growth and prosperity. So I think we are at the point that, again, like 85, if we take this crisis and we allocate the political capital to the holy cows, as opposed to like adjusting and reforming and kind of thinking we're just going to plow through, we're going to be missing a historical magnitude of an opportunity.
And so if you go do this, and we, after 120 years, we say, how should we remember Yonatan Adiri at the end of his life? What should we say?
Look, I think in all honesty, I would want to be at a point where I'm at least a footnote in the history of the process that got us to that point. I think we're going to, by the end of the decade, we're going to have to look radically different. The opportunity is enormous.
It is.
It is aligned with, we are very much aligned with where the world is going. And kind of Indo-Saudi, Israeli axis, right? From a you take Herzl right now. We're all kind of gloom and doom right now, right?
Not
you take
me.
Herzl,
I mean,
and you
it's been
tell
hard,
him,
but no.
and you put him in the prime minister's office, right? And tell him, hey, that you have peace with, you have the Abrahamic Accords. You're on the verge of normalization with Saudi Arabia. No, peace with Egypt. $500 billion economy. Run the country. You're like, I can't believe that. For 125 years, that's what you guys were able to create, right? Whereas when you think about him in 1897, fighting against 2,000 almost years of like non-sovereign Jew thinking, right? Like almost like an immune system to sovereignty that we've built over 2,000 years. Almost 1 million people running away from Russia after pogroms and not going to Israel, saying, becoming sovereign, nah, I'll just go to wherever, right? Somewhere in the West. And again, you've written about this extensively. Your book on Purim was transformational for me and how I understand Judaism. And how, like, actually, when we're at the golden era, that's when we need to open our eyes, right? And so that was, like, think of him. Nobody wanted to come to Basel. Literally, the people who came to Basel were not the leadership of the Jewish people. And who came to Israel? Who believed in the idea of sovereign Jews? And you read about, when you read Ben-Gurion, 20s, 30s, 40s, adversity, existential threats. Like we were on the verge of extinction. So if you tell them you have a $500 billion economy, you're 10 million people, you're competitive globally, you have a very strong army, you're
fast demographic growth.
I mean, the opportunity is amazing, but we need to go back to the fundamental layer, right? There are some holy cows we cannot accept anymore. And these are tough. There are tough decisions to make. They're going to be painful. You said recently something that I kind of am trying to wrap my head around, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember it, but Jews haven't had like power politics for so long because we weren't in power, right? So this idea of having unity as the litmus test is wrong, right? We need to have unity of vision. We need to know where we're going. But it's okay to have an argument, and it's okay to have some painful decisions that are going to be painful for certain types of people. I would say so long as we have a kind of the Israeli New Deal and everybody kind of chips in, then I think it's worthwhile.
Thank you for joining me, Yonatan.
Thank you.
You can learn more about Yonatan Adiri on X, formerly Twitter, at YONATANADIRI. He actually had a fascinating tweet earlier today about Germany. There's a story on Bloomberg today that German manufacturing is collapsing, talking about a country that needs to make a leap into the 21st
100%.
century. Germany is one of them, and we wish them luck. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please rate us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen. Yonatan, thank you.
Thank you.